to success, many obstacles. I remember when they said it wasn't logical. When they was like, it's really just improbable. Then they told me my dreams impossible. But now it seems the more unstoppable. Number one, do the math untoppable. Just
MK Asante. Rosa Clemente. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Femi Bogle-Assegai. And I didn't think it would be right to have a conversation on Black Lives Matter and hip-hop without actually doing a synopsis of what Black Lives Matter is. So, it was founded by Alicia Garza with Patrice Cullors and Opal Tometi as a call to action for Black people after 17-year-old Trayvon Martin was posthumously placed on trial for his own murder, and the killer George Zimmerman was not held accountable for the crime he committed. It was a response to the anti-Black racism that permeates in our society and also, unfortunately, our movement. Black Lives Matter is an ideological and political intervention in a world where Black lives are systematically and intentionally targeted for demise. It's an affirmation of Black folks' contributions to society, our humanity, and our resilience in the face of deadly oppression. Black Lives Matter is a unique contribution that goes beyond extrajudicial killings of Black people by police and vigilantes. It goes beyond narrow nationalism that can be prevalent within some Black communities, which merely calls on Black people to love Black, live Black, and buy Black, keeping straight cis men at the front of the movement while our sisters, queer, trans, and disabled folks take up roles in the background or not at all. Black Lives Matter affirms the lives of Black, queer, and trans folks, disabled folks, Black undocumented folks, folks with records, women, and all Black lives along the gender spectrum. It centers those that have been marginalized within Black liberation movements. It is a tactic to rebuild the Black liberation movement. The guiding principles: diversity, restorative justice, unapologetic Blackness, globalism, collective value, transgender affirming, the Black woman, the Black family, and empathy. And this work is by no means foreign to Connecticut. There have been a multitude of like Moral Monday events, and some of the people may actually be here too. We actually might invite a good amount of them, but we actually do have, it has been happening here in Connecticut, so we're definitely proud of that. But before going any further, I'd like to observe a moment of silence for the hundreds lost this year and the millions taken before. Thank you. And now let's get to it. All right.
Yeah, I'm good here.
Is your mic on?
Yes.
We're good.
All right, just so you know, exits are in the back. All right, first question. I'm going to be honest, I stole my first question. I'm a fan of about people and like what drives them. So I'm borrowing from like BuzzFeed and other Round podcasts. Just for everybody on the table, like, what do you do and why?
For me, I do what I do because I can't not do what I do. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? You know, someone asked me why I write because I can't not write. You know what I mean? I can't accept what not writing means. I can't accept what not doing what I do means. It's a betrayal to everything I stand for. It'd be a betrayal to myself. So I have to do what I do because if not, I wouldn't be able to look at myself. I wouldn't be able to live with myself. You know, what I do gives me energy. It gives me life. It gives me breath. You know what I mean? It keeps me alive. It keeps me hopeful. You know, it keeps me vibrant. It keeps me active. You know, so for me, it's like breathing. I have to live my calling. You know what I mean? I can't not live my calling. So yeah. Blank page saved me. America enraged me. Then that bitch paid me. You slaves old slaved me. My grandma told me the streets far from holy. Now I'm lonely. My homies' bodies is holy. So I have to do this. I have to tell the stories for all the people that don't get a chance to tell the stories.
afternoon, good evening. Can you hear me? I'm getting an echo.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I do what I do because I cannot not do what I do. I try to simply ignore the happenings, if you will. But I simply cannot do that. As an African woman who's traveled across the globe extensively, looking at the lives of African people, myself having African children, and recognizing that there's no me without you or you without me.
That's right.
Understanding that humanity is all of us, every single one of us, regardless of this social construction called race. I do what I do because it is important to educate. Educate the masses.
Yes.
Educate, coming from the words educate, put in, to give information and to enlighten people. So it's about enlightenment for me. If we have a society that claims that we're free, claims that we have rights, then without knowledge you cannot make use of those rights, and neither can you preserve them. So I do what I do because it is a necessity.
Well, it depends. If I'm watching The Walking Dead, I'm probably taking a shot of tequila. I know some of the adults are already like, man, there's high school students here talking about marijuana. Yeah, you know why I'm talking about marijuana? Just on a side note, it's because there's 2 generations incarcerated, and a lot of white people who are free smoking all over, having house parties, making bad dope. Adults want to act like kids don't know what you're talking about. I just watched a great interview yesterday on MSNBC with Dr. Carl Hart, a neuroscientist, that talks about the fakeness of the narrative around drug abuse. And how we should be questioning why society has such a society in the United States of America where everything we do leads to an addiction.
Yeah.
Everything we do, shopping, sexuality, sex, alcohol, food. You see what I'm talking about, how diabetics, people will let people in their family become a diabetic, eat food that's going to kill them. And then when their high school student comes home like, yo, I just want a joint because my teachers are bugging out, because security and police are tackling me or arresting me, I got a record before I go to college. And we want to act like marijuana is a big deal. I know. So it depends. When and where. What? Why do what I do? You know? So I'm always going to be the radical and the anarchist and the left and all of that. And the other day, somebody was like, Rosa, why do you do what you do? And I said I was born on the margins and I'm going to live this way till the day I die. Right? And the older I get, the more of a need I have to be so brutally honest with young people, because this society wants to kill 7-year-olds and 12-year-olds and even 6-year-old autistic boys in Louisiana, regardless of their race. A young white kid that was killed by 2 brutal police. That's why I do what I do, right? You know, but tomorrow it might be different depending on the situation that we're in as a people. But at the end, I follow what my 2 brothers and sisters up here are saying, or those that don't identify as male or female. Revolutionary struggle. You know, the one thing you said about Black Lives Matter that was interesting, they said we want a resurgence of the Black liberation movement, and I'm in Black Lives Matter, and I actually disagree with that. The Black liberation movement has never died. It's actually been underground for a while. What we're seeing is an actual resurgence and a growing number of particularly Afro-Latino young people that are coming into their own Black consciousness. So depending on the time that we're in, I think that is a good philosophical question to ask. Why do people do what they do? But I think an interesting question too is to ask why people don't do more given the situation that we're in. Yeah, right. I think
as a writer to that, I would raise one question that I think we all ought to be asking ourselves. Because it's an important question. As you quite rightly pointed out, the Black liberation movement never died, right? It's not just been underground, it's also been incarcerated. So we have in this society political prisoners that we don't talk about. You know, and that includes our Native American brothers and sisters, some of whom have been locked away for over 40 years that we're not talking about. But the question that I'd like you all to address yourselves to, and certainly we all should address ourselves to, are all human lives of equal moral worth? Are all human lives of equal moral worth? That's the fundamental question that we need to ask ourselves. Why do we need to ask ourselves that question? Because that will determine for us whether we're part of the problem or part of the solution. What role do I play in this equation out here that I find so egregious and difficult and complex? What role do I play, if in fact I'm playing a role at all?
Alright, so again, this is going to be about hip-hop also, so I had like throw a question in there too. So Common used to love her, Joe Budden's going to love all together. NASA won't pronounce her dead. Before delving deeper into the conversation about hip-hop, music, the culture, and its place and active spaces, I just think it's necessary to ask, like, what's your hip-hop relationship status?
I'm like, hip hop to me is definitely like all those things, right? Like your friend, your enemy, your lover. Or as Tony Blackman said, the garden hurts. Beyond Beats and Rhymes, really like a classic now in the hip hop documentary genre, right? Like, you know, hip hop. You know, it's like an abusive relationship sometimes. But you know what? I love hip-hop. And all those pronouncements that hip-hop is dead to me is not like even taking into account the vast globalness of hip-hop culture, of the politicalness of hip-hop, and not really having an understanding of how the system of white supremacy through the record industry, particularly through the music industry, destroyed the mainstreamness of hip-hop. But I think it's an interesting time for the culture, not only in the other elements besides rap, whether it's not knowledge culture and politics, whether it's graffiti culture, whether it's you know, fashion, DJing, and you know, actually seeing real DJs, not an Apple iTunes. Very good DJ. I appreciated the music that you played as a DJ because you were making political choices, even if you don't view yourself political. I don't know, you're making those choices. So I love hip hop. I'm gonna ride with it. I was born in South Bronx in 1972, right across the street from Soundview. So I ride and die with the culture because I understand, you know, what the powers that be do to destroy. I also understand that movements push the musical element of the culture, and that's why we've seen such an amazing not a resurgence, but a wave of young artists. Yeah, Kendrick is great. I love Kendrick. I was in LA all last year while this Kendrick was growing up. But you know, Joey Badass is dope. If Lupe would come back to us, you know, I think Nicki Minaj is about to do some very interesting political things, and this is coming from somebody that started a campaign against her. Malcolm X, you know, I think it's interesting that the likes of Rick Ross and them are pretty much deaded in terms of like how young people really understand that the music they're listening to on the radio actually does not reflect anything but capitalism. Like I think young people get it, which is why they're actually gravitating outside of rap music, but still participating in hip hop culture. They're participating in other elements. So I want to go that kind of where I come from politically with hip hop, because for me, hip-hop is the voice of the voiceless, right? It's the political resistance. And just because we see it so corporatized in America doesn't mean it has so many other values around the world that we're not even understanding, and that it has so many practitioners in the U.S. I'm sitting next to one young practitioner, not even my generation, but below, that is using hip-hop in the classroom and in other elements, and that's critically important too. kind of thing. So yeah, I'm never gonna leave hip hop, because hip hop, the people, really the working class people and the working class conditions will never leave us, so we can never really leave the culture. That's how I feel about it. Other people may disagree,
That's what's up. Well, my relationship with hip hop is definitely beautiful and positive. It doesn't mean that we don't go through our little, our little dramas and whatnot. You know what I'm saying? Like, yo, what would you just beat for her last week? Yo, she good now, though. We good. Yeah, exactly. She be tripping, but for the most part, it's interesting. Something happened in my life that's really important. So many things I want to talk to you about, but I'll leave it at this. I wrote a book called It's Bigger Than Hip Hop. I think I see it over there. And I signed it for Rosa earlier. And I wrote that book in 2008 or 2009. And it was my analysis of hip hop at the time, my critique. Nas was actually around that time. I think that Nas had just dropped Hip Hop Is Dead. And shit was looking pretty. she was looking pretty dead for a minute. You know what I'm saying? And then a lot of things started to happen. You know what I'm saying? In the culture, in the world, in the society. I came across one quote that tripped me out. It was a quote in a book of Proverbs, and it said, "The highest form of critique is creation." Wow. And I was like, damn, that's crazy. Because in the back of my mind, I knew that I really should be on this mic and I should be spitting. Rather than just critiquing and analyzing the hip hop. I should be, I should be demonstrating what hip hop is through my rhymes, Not just critiquing other people's rhymes, because I'm a poet. And so I came across that quote, but I had a lot of fear. Just jump on the mic, I definitely had fear related to it. And I kind of, it's just like the way I teach in creative writing, I teach my students, when your hero in a movie, when your protagonist has a calling, they always reject the calling initially, right? Because you're like, I can't do that, you know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? I'm a professor, I don't do that, I don't say, whatever you think you are or whatever. Wow. And anyway, yesterday, Talib Kweli and Ninth Wonder dropped a project called Indy 500. I'm really proud to say to you that this epiphany that I had about this creation critique thing, that was 2 years ago. And I'm really happy to tell you that I have a song on the album. It's called Bangers, yeah. And it's So my relationship with hip hop, is in that song. You know what I'm saying? It's bangers. It really represents, me, coming kind of full circle of really realizing that my critique of hip hop is gonna be in the music that I make. That's gonna be the alternative. You know what I'm saying? So in that song Bangers on the drum, I say, live from the flames of Baltimore. What you call this? You don't call it war. Tanks in my hood, no aquarium. No thanks, Nat God ain't scared of them. Buzz cuts and Humvees hunt me bluntly, cause I be the color of blunt leaves. Leaving streets redder than monthlies. Black light, we on that month-to-month lease. So we burn this bitch. Wake up, shoot a scene like I'm earning this dick. My jaw caked up, she done earned it. Limbaugh, thanks up. Anyway, we need a beat or something, but my relationship to hip hop, is like I said, it's a beautiful one. It's a tumultuous one at times, but I really believe in what I call the resurrection of hip hop right now. But I say that really just as kind of a buzzword, because as Rosa was saying, it was never dead. But I'm gonna take it even a step further, and I can talk a little bit deeper about this even later. It was never born. You know what I mean? It was never born, right? I've been studying these ideas of birthlessness and of the continuum of life. You know what I mean? And so some of these things aren't even, they don't die, they're not born. It's just a continuum. And just to kind of give you some context of what I'm talking about, my son passed away last year, and his name was Wonderful. And I named him Wonderful so that you wouldn't feel sad when I talk about this. You know what I mean? I named him Wonderful because he's a celebration of life. It's all joy. You know, we celebrated his life for every moment that he was here. You know what I mean? So, and we didn't want it to be a sad thing. But watching Wonderful, I caught him when he was born, and he passed away on my chest. And watching the cycle of life, and then I cremated him. You know, we cremated him on my property. I did it myself. I saw his body become part of the fire, become part of nature, become part of the woods, become part of the season, where did it go? It didn't go anywhere. You know what I mean? Like, I saw how nothing really goes anywhere, right? And how nothing's really born and nothing really dies, and that we're on this continuum, that Wonderful is still here. You know what I mean? My mentor, Maya Angelou, is still here. Everyone is still here, you know, and, 15, 26, 16, 19, to me, that's when Black Lives Matter started, you know what I'm saying? But at the same time, it started even before that, you know? So anyway, what was the question?
We're getting back to that, I actually have those lines right here because I was going to another question. So we're getting back to that.
Okay, well.
My relationship to hip-hop is my children. My children, nieces, nephews, family members, and the fact that when we had our bookstore in the city of Hartford, my husband and I, we had young people in the bookstore. Because for us, listening to our young people is always important. We need to hear them, we need to understand what they're saying, and we do not need to reject their voices. And so that's my relationship. My children introduced me to Tupac before he was, what do you say, blow up? I was introduced to Tupac. So it's a continuous relationship. I have a nephew sitting in the audience tonight whose entire life is hip-hop. He's an artist. Paige, where are you? Is he here? Right. So I live and breathe hip-hop. My family members, you know, it's not something that I reject, but it's important to me to be real clear about the spectrum that is hip-hop. So the arts, you know, the writing, the singing, the drama, all the expressions that our young people bring is critical because it speaks to their pain, their condition. And this other stuff that is commercialized and gets pumped out there, one has to distinguish for our young people who do not necessarily get that. You know, so where the music is being pushed and projected and is projecting negativity, if you will, about African people, then we have to, certainly as adults, and those who have an understanding, have to be able to delineate and say, no, that's not hip-hop. That is a noise. That is commercialization. That is iconography, imagery, and the kind of language that those who create reality would want you to know or want you to understand. And that's important that we distinguish in that way.
So I already read along the official description of Black Lives Matter. I went through like there's pretty much the guiding principles, the brief history, and like where it started from. And it's been alluded to on this stage, but I just want to know, like, from a visceral level, like when you hear the word, when you first heard the words Black Lives Matter, like what did that mean to you? Whether it be as a movement or just hearing those words together, like that couple put together.
I was extremely impressed with that particular term, Black Lives Matter. I was impressed with it because for the first time in this country, I heard black people, young black people saying, I am a human being and you will regard me as nothing else but a human being. Because I think black people have been very confused for a long time, since the movement in the 60s, since the Civil Rights Movement and the passing of the Civil Rights Act. Black people have almost lost their reason for being. Because what happened is our parents became very silent, if you will, about the struggle. Hence this idea that the struggle died or it went elsewhere. But we had won something. No, what African people got in this country is legislation to put them into the equation around systems and institutions and rights for everybody. Every single human being in the United States can, if they can determine that they are part of minority, secure civil rights for themselves. So black people got very confused when they looked up and saw that everybody was able to utilize the civil rights legislation. Well, that's the purpose, that's the exercise. While at the same time, the humanity of African people continued to be disregarded, continued to be dismissed, continued to be denigrated. And so I think for me, Black Lives Matter means the humanity of African people. And for those of you who have not seen the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, you need to download that and have a look at what that is about. Because to my mind, that is what the struggle is about. And it's not just here in the United States of America, but it's global. Because you're talking about not just people of African descent, but you're talking about oppressed and poor people all over the planet. Oppressed and poor people all over the planet. This is not just a statement about something social, but rather it carries all of the political and economic connotations that goes with what it is that we desire as people, human beings.
Thank you for that. For me, I think the first time I saw it, I probably read it, honestly, like online first, you know? And I think probably you said like visceral, like probably one of the thoughts I had, I thought of Cornel West's book from back in the day, Race Matters. I think just the word matter. I think I thought of Black Matter, you know what I mean? Just, you know, like scientifically thought of Black Matter, what that means. And then I think it just kind of hit me that like, yeah, like of course, like, you know what I mean? Like for me, you said it was interesting when you were saying that after the 60s it kind of died out, or it seemed that it died out. The parents kind of weren't as involved. My parents were actually really involved and really active, so growing up, like, that's why for me Black Lives Matter is like of course, yeah, like, you know, we grew up extremely exposed and involved to things, you know, that were going on with African people. So, but I was definitely happy about it. Happy to see my students at Morgan State so active and engaged in it, you know. And I think it was helpful because there were like all these things that were happening, you know, even before Trayvon Martin. I remember like a lot of instances were happening where young people, it was the first time that they were really seeing like just gross injustice. Like, for example, I think there was, what was that, the one called, the boys, it was a group, there was Jenna 6, and then there was a girl, the girl's name was, it started with an S. She was the girl who basically pushed someone in a locker and got like 10 years in jail, something crazy like that. But it was all these isolated incidents happening, and I felt like the students didn't really have, young people didn't really have like kind of a vehicle, a mechanism that they could join to kind of connect all those dots. And so I felt like that did that for them. And, you know, I've you know, my role as an artist, as an educator, you know, when I saw it, it was something that resonated with me and spoke to my heart. And so, yeah.
I mean, when I first I heard of Black Lives Matter was really after Trayvon. I mean, the day that Patrice and Opal and Alicia put the tweet out. But listen, I called my friends and I'm like, oh man, this is regression. Like, why do we have to ask that Black Lives Matter, right? And I think there's a historical misunderstanding of social justice movements in this country, right? So, civil rights to Black and brown power we forget the lost years of the 70s and the 80s. I mean, this is where most of the Puerto Rican political prisoners come from. This is where Oscar Lopez Rivera, who's still serving time. This is Leonard Peltier. This is underground Black Liberation Army. This is Assata Shakur. These things are happening in the 70s to the mid-80s. Okay, there's a reason Ronald Reagan needs to become president at that time. So, right, like, and then whether it was first Black and brown unity folks around South LA and stopping the first militarized police, which were the battering rams that they tested out, where there's young people already knowing that crack cocaine was purposely put into our communities. Like, so I feel like as a historian, I am a historian completing my doctorate at UMass Amherst, and we forget these struggles where a lot of our people became incarcerated or maintain being incarcerated because of their political beliefs. And I think what happened during the 70s and 80s up until the mid-90s is that there was a false sense that Black people, particularly African Americans, could achieve. This is really Bill Cosby time. And like, all of these things are very intimately connected, as well as what then is happening in the 80s in Latin America and complete destabilization, right? Which is why we see to this day actual refugees coming to the border because of U.S. policies in Latin America. I say that to say, to me, this is where we have to be very nuanced, and young people have to understand this history. By 2000, hip-hop, there are certain people in hip-hop saying, we need to use this culture for politics. Not Russell Simmons, Puff Daddy, all that crap that they brought out during the elections, but young people, particularly African American and Latino, South Asian young people saying, wait, mass incarceration, how do we bring culture, art, politics into this movement, and then how do we view ourselves as a hip-hop political community? What are our demands? And one of the things that happened was the creation of the National Hip Hop Political Convention, which I was one of the co-founders of, including with Raz Baraka, who's now the mayor of Newark. I gotta tell you that history so you can have this connection, right? As this is growing in America, where you have the first kind of generation of hip hop folks saying, wait a minute, there's been demands being made. Our elders have been incarcerated. We're going to join organizations and learn to become leaders, because you're not a leader because you go to a protest. You actually have to be in an organized effort. This was attempted between, I would say, 2001 after September 11 to about 2007. When Barack Obama came on the scene, that's when something shifted in the consciousness of people purposefully. People had to be like, yo, if we get this Black man in, we're good. Because visibility is what people think is power. So there became a generation of us within hip-hop activism that were completely marginalized. Well, let me say me and like 5 other of us who were like, wait, when you phone up with these Democrats? What? Cynthia's gonna run? Okay, so it started with this brother, Dr. Jared Ball, running for Morgan State. And then Cynthia won the primaries and she asked me to run. We run. And the reason I tell folks this is because we knew that running against a Black man wasn't going to be something that mad people were going to talk about. We knew where the masses of our people were going to go, even Puerto Rican nationalists and Black nationalists. They were going, and even hardcore folks that had never voted before, that kind of knew they wanted to be where the masses were. And I get that. So what we've had since 2008, up until Troy Davis is executed, is a generation of young folks that even if they didn't vote at that time, felt Black man's gonna make everything okay. When Troy Davis is executed, at the middle of the night, when many of us had gone home thinking this day of execution, then a year later you have Trayvon. Then a year later, or 18 months later, Michael Brown and Ferguson. So I really wanted to contextualize this for this purpose. When I got the call, I was like, damn, we are just asking to be treated as humans.
That's right.
I said, I'm not feeling that. But then I had to think, right? Something is sparking with young folks. First of all, this is three sisters saying this.
Yes.
Wait a minute, two of them are queer. Oh my God, yo, this is about to be a shift in how we see leadership. Okay, so then they've been around. When Tef Poe gets out there the day Michael Brown is murdered and takes that Instagram of Michael Brown's stepfather saying they murdered my son, there had already been a dissatisfaction with Obama and the Democrats, but one of the dissatisfaction was coming from the Latino community that were like, basically, F you, we put you back in office and you still deporting us. Like, what's good? Then all this is happening. I had to say to myself, you gotta meet people, you gotta meet young people where they're at right now.
Right.
And the thing is that we've been waiting 6 years for something to pop off, right? And I wasn't gonna be one of those, quote, older folks or someone in the movement 20 years that's gonna be critiquing folks. I'm about to, like, get ABD status and spend the next year up in Black Lives Matter, which is what I did. I moved to LA to teach, but I spent the whole year last year with the BLM chapter in LA, right? And I laid that trajectory out because then it's important to understand, okay, the consciousness has been raised, but that doesn't mean that there's a political guiding ideology right now. And if we're not very careful, we're right there. This co-optation by the Democratic Party again, which is something we said would never happen again, but is actually happening right now in front of our faces, is very freaking dangerous. Especially since we, for the last 2 years, haven't just been talking about Black Lives Mattering. There's been black and brown people putting their literally bodies on the line for that. And that's a very important place that we've gotten to. And so that was my first gut reaction, like, yo, what's good? Why we have to holler about this? But then I said to myself, as an Afro-Latino woman and internationalist too, like, wait a minute, Afro-Latinos, we're about to claim space up in here too, because this issue of mass incarceration is really the guiding issue around this. The most egregious thing in Black Lives Matter that we see is the actual killing. Right. Every day, every 28 hours and less of our people. But the actual systemic stuff that's happening, we actually think that a black president or a female president is going to change these conditions. We'll retrograde another decade back, and we really can't afford that right now. Right? We can't afford that. And I have to take the history out, especially for young folks right now. Because less than a decade ago, we were talking about that school to prison pipeline, and we let it happen. See, my generation let it happen under our watch, and now, from kindergarten, even daycare now, where they're doing suspensions in daycare, up until this, we're allowing our entire community of children to literally go to prison every day and then not be mad every time they walk out the prison, basically, where they're not learning anything. And it's really going to be very interesting to see what politicians or what things are out there to co-opt us when the actual material conditions and the way we're living has not moved one needle. In fact, it's regressed. If we look at every economic indicator, including the unemployment number yesterday, which has unemployment at 5.3%, but 12.1 in the black community and almost 9.9 in the Latino community, we got to think about that kind of stuff. You know, in context.
But you know, just again, to much of what you said, but I think it's really important that we understand that nothing will change for us if we do not get to the source of the ideas that drive the activities. We must get to the source of the ideas that drive the activities. Why do I say this? I say this because during the 1970s, Sidney Wheelhead, sociologist out of New York, asked a question. The question he asked, he was a professor at New York University, who needs the Negro? Who needs the Negro? That's a significant question, because whether we want to accept it or not, that's really what we're dealing with. We were brought here, African people that is, were brought here not to kind of just move around, but we were brought here to engage in labor, right? We didn't come willingly. So when that labor disappears, well, who needs this population of people? And so what we have is we exist in a society that regards itself as a European society, right?
Yes.
Okay? A law was passed to say that this is a European nation. We live in a society where the construction of the policies and the ordinances and the law and the political rhetoric and the ideology that drives the country is about the promotion of white supremacy. This is a nonsense because it's intellectual dishonesty. Because we're all human beings. We also now know, Human Genome Project and so on, that we're one race of people. We're one race of people. And I think that people of African descent have a responsibility and the duties to stand up and again become the moral conscience of the United States and the planet. Because no one group of people have the right to oppress other groups of people. And we can point to all kinds of codes and laws and what have you that have been put in place for the sole purpose of stopping and blocking people of African ancestry. Montesquieu, famous French philosopher, devised a theory that talks about civilized people, barbaric people, and savages. All right? And superimposed on that theory, we got from the Göttingen University, Frederick Blumenbach. He introduced in 1791 the stratification of the human family. What did he do? He gave us the Caucasoids, Caucasians, the Asiasoids, Asians, and the Negrozoids, Negroes. Before that, people of African descent were called African people. They were Africans. We were Africans. We got Negroes from that stratification. And that stratification came about as a direct result of the Haitian people kicking the behind of who? The French. Right? Toussaint Louverture, Dessalines, right? And Khrushchev kicked the behind of the French. And so Europeans said, this is not right, this cannot happen. How they organized themselves to such a degree that they've been able to take out Napoleon's army. We have got to put in place, remember now, we have the printing press in place. So we have the ability to write and to distribute, to promulgate information. Right? So these ideas were put down in writing and distributed throughout institutions in Europe and ultimately in the United States of America. And so, for what we're dealing with here is an ideology that speaks to our non-existence and us being a people who should be disregarded, dismissed. We're free pork, in other words. Free pork for everything and everybody. If you are in an institution that speaks to the dehumanization of specific groups of people. For example, if you look at Rwanda, what happened in Rwanda and Burundi? Those people killed each other, destroyed each other. And they were able to do so because they called each other cockroaches and rodents and so on and so forth. When you dehumanize the people, you can do anything to them. Our children are being dehumanized. Our young people are being dehumanized. And for me, as a person of the 60s, if you will, right? I am absolutely horrified to be watching my children and soon to be grandchildren having to do and go through the exact same struggle that I went through. When I was in high school, I couldn't carry an Afro pig because it was regarded as a weapon. This is when I used to comb my hair. I will carry it. Okay, and so we did what we had to do to carry our Afro pits. But the point that I'm making is, it is important to go to the source. Identify what is the ideas that's driving the actions. What's the ideas that's driving the actions? And this exists in every single area that we exist to work in, people. Whether it be education, entertainment, economics, law, labor, as Dr. Wellesley says, sex, war, and politics. Every single area that we work in, that we exist in, is permeated with the ideas of the non-existence of people of African descent. So there is this view that we can be disregarded and treated any kind of way, up to and including gunned down, because after all, this is blackbird shooting again.
It was definitely apropos to think that question took like all day, because it gets really good stuff. It's like, it's a small question, but again, these words are heavy, like it means a lot. So definitely thanks for all of that. I know you said we'll give like a short answer. But this one was like, this is specifically to you, and like you can that too. In an interview with David Hip Hop Corner, I had to go back to this one. You were asked if hip hop was a movement. Your response to that, unfortunately, it wasn't at the time. We're talking about 2009, because we were missing a unified agenda, principles, and a body of people behind it. We hadn't brought our agendas to the table. It was your hope that we would get there at some point. If I ask that question now, what do you think hip hop is politically, and how much of that is attributable to Black Lives Matter?
I actually don't really think we have any movements right now. I mean, I think we have a lot of reaction and a lot of things we're trying to organize, but we don't have a sustained movement. You can't have a sustained movement if you're asking white nonprofits like George Soros to fund your campaign. And you can't sustain a movement by just shutting down candidates. I'm in BLM, so I'm like, I have every right to critique what I think is happening, but it's not a BLM problem. Like, I'm also I used to be a hardcore member of the Malcolm X grassroots movement. I more advocate for the organization. But after what I saw go down in Ferguson, I believe unless we're literally locking down local communities and self-determining them, from cooperation economics to land, not just acquiring land, like I don't fall into the hyper-black capitalism that we see, and I love the Nation of Islam, but that's also a black capitalist kind of venture in a way, right? Because what we're trying to do is still work and glean from the system. And I think that's where we've gone wrong in a lot. I've gone wrong in it as an organizer, thinking that a law is going to change. What usually happens is we implement a law and they just make another law. Right. I was wrong in thinking that maybe a presidential candidate that is progressive could change the empire. But I don't think we understand the empire. And I don't think we fully understand the systems that are in play. That doesn't mean that I don't want to be part of trying to build a movement. I just want to now be part of a very self-determining, people of color based movement. Like, I'm all into multiracialism, but I'm also in a space where I'm like, white folks need to do what they gotta do, in a way, in their communities, or working class people may have to look at things that they do differently. And then we also have to understand that white supremacy has been so refined that it doesn't necessarily need the white minority to carry it out, right? It has people like a Barack Obama or Mark Rubio or Ted Cruz, or patriarchy has Hillary Clinton to carry out patriarchy. So I think we have to have a more political understanding, right? Like, that we have people that look like me. I was in Ferguson 10 days after. And to see them young people boo the NAACP, tell Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson be out, to question me as an academic, and you ain't here for the street. And I said, No, I am. And they're like, we'll see if you're here next week. And we were. And me and Talib and other folks have been consistently, because that's our community now, in a way, right? But that we understand that the people of Ferguson, that it was the sets, it was the young people, the working class people, not even college students, the grandmothers who were at those tanks on first 7 days. To see them boo everything that we thought was Black and Latino leadership, to see them question even the church, the way they question it. I'm telling you, man, it's been so incredible. But with all that, how are we building a movement when we're basically still asking power to reform power? How are we building a movement when we're shutting down candidates but not building an alternative party? And I'm not even talking about the Green Party. All right? Those are the things that I'm trying to use my scholarship and activism around. I really am. And I'm real honest, and people don't like it. And I say, I got maybe 50 good years left, and I'm still gonna be 90. Well, I want to get into your whole birth and reap, like, maybe I did more yet. I got 40 years to roll back. I am really trying to first take the lead of young people, to challenge myself around issues that I was not challenged about even 5 years ago, especially around queer folks in the undocumented community, really reflect. But I have to honestly say, I know we're trying to build towards a movement. I don't think we're there. I don't think we're there.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely think that hip-hop has been a sustained movement, just because within hip-hop, you've got so many self-determining elements, you know what I'm saying? We've been able to sustain hip-hop culture, even new distribution models that are happening right now, like even what Kweli and Knife Wonder just did with, their respective collectives or record labels, but they're really collectives, you know what I'm saying? I think hip-hop has always been, there's a sense of unity. Okay, so I'm a professor. I'm a tenured professor, the youngest tenured professor with the history of my university, and I've been a professor for like 9 years. Thank you. I've been a professor for like 9 years. I'm a filmmaker, I'm in these different fields, I'm a writer, but I've never seen unity like in hip-hop. There's no comparison. Academicians are not united. They don't, a lot of times there's, the unity and the love that I see in hip-hop is totally absent in academia. Oh, yeah. Like, it doesn't exist in academia, it doesn't exist in filmmaking, it doesn't exist in being a writer and writers linking up and building and putting the work in with each other and giving each other opportunity. I don't see that with those other fields. So for me, hip-hop has been a movement that really at the core is like love. You know what I mean? That's what Bambaataa talks about. And I feel like that love, that universal love, it ain't just like a Brooklyn thing, you know what I'm saying? It's universal, like what's his name said. But, so for me, that's a movement. And I'm proud to be a part of it, and I feel the love, and I just see it as having so many answers within it, but I definitely think that everything Rosa said was on point. But I do feel like hip-hop is a movement. I'm a part of that.
All right, so quick, an important but overlooked element in fostering and sustaining movements is language. It's essential that a coherent plan is created and communicated. MK, you released Buck, your memoir is a book, an album, and you're working on a movie. Additionally, the book is written in a language underserved. What prompted this approach?
Young buck, buck wild, buck shots, buck town, slave buck, black buck, make buck now. You said what prompted the language of writing it how?
No,
underserved?
Writing it in the language of underserved, so writing it using language of people.
Oh, I wrote it in using my language, so yeah. That was like the easiest thing in the world, you know what I'm saying? But yeah, Buck is a memoir about my life. It's a book about education, miseducation, re-education, self-education, street education. It's a book about the difference in the distance between school and education. It's a book about the graceful survival against impossible circumstances. It deals with my upbringing, growing up in Philadelphia, coming from Zimbabwe. I was born in Zimbabwe, and it started with my brother getting locked up. My brother was incarcerated for most of my teenage years. And then kind of just deals with the effect of that on my family. It deals with my mom's mental health issues. My mom had, mental health issues growing up, so I write about that. My mom used to keep this journal. Me and my mom didn't talk to each other a lot growing up, so she would keep this journal where she would write a lot of her thoughts, what was going on with her, mental health issues. She was suicidal a lot. And I used to read my mom's journal, so I put my mom's actual journal diary entries in the book and interwove those into my narrative. My brother's prison letters from jail, I put those in the narrative too, so that you could I wrote the book from the first person present tense perspective, so you get to see everything as I saw things at 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, so you learn and kind of grow with me. Book talks about my tumultuous relationship with my dad and the struggles that we had coming up. My pop left when I was a young teenager, and just talks about that relationship. And so for me, when I thought about writing this book, I wrote this book because I have a mantra it's bigger than hip hop. If you make an observation, you have an obligation. You know what I'm saying? And so I write the things that I don't see existing, that I want to see existing. Like, I wanted to read Buck or a book like Buck, so that's why I wrote it. You know what I'm saying? I knew that, there's a lot of observations that we make artistically. Like, there's a song I want to hear, and shit doesn't exist, so I gotta make it. You know what I'm saying? There's a movie that I want to watch, and shit don't exist, so I gotta make it. And that's kind of how I operate as an artist. And for me, like I said, it was a no-brainer in terms of how I wrote it. That's the language that I speak. That's the language that I communicate, and that's the language that's authentic to my story. So I wrote it in that way. And I also wanted to show the power of language. Like in the book, can you give me the book for a second? So in the book, I just tell you something real quick. In the book, I talk about certain words, like language. You talk about language, so certain words that we use in Philly. Like, anybody from Philly in here? Well, we use a word in Philly called John. I know y'all heard that. Yeah, John. Yo, what's up with the John now? So, in this opening scene, my brother, he was rolling a blunt, right? And so, I said, another perfect blunt. John looks like a paintbrush. See, John could mean anything. Person, place, or thing. Sometimes if we're telling a story and we don't want people to know what we're talking about, we'll plug John in for everything. Yo, the other day I was at the John around the corner with the young John from down the street, right? We get to the John, right? And the boy at the door, all on this John, not knowing I had that John on me. Man, it was about to be on in that John. And what's so important about that is, it really speaks to what Professor Bogle was talking about in the sense of where we come from, language, so that's like, when we talk about John, what's up with the John, you got the John, if you don't know the context, obviously you have no idea what somebody can be talking about, and that becomes so important for African people trying to get free, right? Yeah. You know what I mean? If you got the John, I could be talking about anything, that Turner type shit, you know what I mean? So it's like, you know what I mean? Like, yo, we still doing the John later on? Like, that could be anything. So, but to take it back to the historical element, back in the day, there's all these examples of obviously as African people, and I've traveled to over 40 countries, and I've been to about 20 countries in Africa, and it's amazed me the languages, like in Ghana, in Nigeria alone, they speak over 400 languages, you know what I'm saying? That's just one country, you know what I'm saying? And that's not even a real country, right? Because the lines aren't really, true to the origins. But anyway, 400 languages in Nigeria alone. So you think about African people all coming to America, speaking all these different languages. Like we didn't all speak the same languages. We think Africa's a monolith sometimes, but it's so many different languages and cultures. So we all get over here and we have to learn English. But we don't all speak the same language, you know what I'm saying? So English becomes kind of the common denominator in terms of linguistically that we may all speak, you know what I'm saying? But obviously there's this fundamental problem, right? You know, the same motherfucker that's teaching you English, the same motherfucker that got you the chains, so shit kind of gets complicated, right? Like how are we going to do this? So that's why when we call, like in Philly, we talk like, you know, another Philly word is, yo, you gotta freak that joint. Now freak ain't what you think it is. Well, kinda, but in a good way. Like so to freak something means to adjust it. You know what I mean? Adjust it in a way that's favorable. You know what I'm saying? So what we have to do is we gotta freak the language. So what does freaking the language mean? That means back in the day, you know what I'm saying? Like you could have a situation where you could have a bunch of enslaved Africans. We could be chilling around here. There could be a slave master outside, and all the enslaved Africans say, "Yo, you hear MK just escaped the plantation?" And Rosa say, "MK escaped? That's a bad nigga." Now the white slave master is gonna say, "Yes, that's a bad nigga." And that's how he's hearing the shit, you know what I'm saying? All the black people know that when you like, yo, that's a bad nigga, you know what I'm saying? That's not bad at all, you know? That I'm really exactly, that I'm really great. And as soon as the slave master realizes, because one day he's gonna realize, like, you know, those guys say bad, they really mean, you know what I mean? He's gonna get it, like, and as soon as he gets it, we don't say that shit no more. Get off that, yo. Get off that. Like, we don't say that no more. Like, that's why the language always, like, you know what I mean? Like, the shit changes quick. Sometimes I go back to Philly, you know what I mean? And it's like, the shit, I'm like, I was just here last week. Like, they got some new shit already. Like, damn. You know?
It's all that jazz, right?
Exactly.
But what we're doing, we're superimposing the English language, which is not a very good language to express yourself from, right? On African syntax. And so that's why we appear to be speaking back to front. We appear not to know our tenses, know our nouns, don't know anything about our verbs, but we understand each other, right?
I mean, it's the same with Spanish-speaking folks, right? Like, the assumption that, and actually, there's less and less Latinos in America, in the United States that speak Spanish, but Castilian Spanish. So when I went to Spain, they were like, and I was like, I have no clue. Or, I mean, the fact too that depending on where you come from the Spanish-speaking Caribbean or your colonizer, depending on who the colonizer was, there's so many indigenous languages, right? So like, I was on a recent delegation with the National Domestic Workers Alliance to the border of Arizona, where I witnessed Operation Streamline taking effect and visiting and with going to Arpaio's camps and shit that he has in Arizona. And when we were in the courtroom, some of the brothers and sisters that had been detained at the border were from Honduras and did not speak Spanish, right? And the lawyers were like, I don't understand why not. And we were like, because they're indigenous and they're speaking fucking indigenous languages. Right? Like, they don't speak Spanish. Like, what? Right? So that kind of idea of language of how we can flip, recreate, code it.
Yeah.
How we do it in the hood.
Yeah.
Regardless of if you're speaking Spanish or a native other African tongue. Like, there's just a language thing.
Right.
The best way to describe it is that there's the show Blackish, right?
Yeah, that works.
Where one of them, he's like, the nod.
Yeah.
How you giving the black man the nod? He's like, what are you talking about? So we tell my daughter, and she's like, Mama, I get it. Like, if I see black and brown people, I go like that. You know? So language is key. It's not only Black Lives Matter as breaking what needed to be broken, right, when we assert Black Lives Matter, but also just that language from the bottom up that people give us.
The drums, the tone, the way that we use tone, right? The way that we use our instruments, as I said. I mean, it's all that jazz.
And even to connect it kind of what you talked about in the beginning, you talked about why you do what you do is at its core, you used the word, you talked about education, you said it comes from education, and you talked about that meaning enlightenment, and that being put in. Well, to connect this to hip-hop, the word hip actually, we have a lot of African retentions, cultural retentions, and some of those retentions are linguistic. So, you have a lot of language that's in English that comes from African languages. One of those words is hip. Hip, the etymology of hip is a Wolof word, hippie, H-I-P-I, which means to open one's eyes and see. It's a term of enlightenment. So when you combine hip and hop etymology spring forward into action. So enlightened action. Yeah.
Something Common Core will teach you this.
Thank you. Just to bring it back, there are many supporters and proponents of Black Lives Matter in hip-hop. The genre is seemingly at odds with BLM's guiding principles, however. There's a huge emphasis on restorative justice, but there's silence in regards to safety and dignity of our LGBTQ family, and Black women aren't always respected. How does hip-hop address this?
Hip-hop address which part?
Just in general, they're not aligning with the principles of BLM. So
Well, I don't think you separate the two. Right, if we talk about hip-hop as a generation, and we look at the Black Lives Matter movement, that is a second wave of hip-hop generation therapy, sociologically, if we define it that way. So, hip-hop is not devoid in Black Lives Matter, right? Right? Just like I say, I'm a hip-hop practitioner, activist. Well, more not a practitioner since I'll never rhyme, in terms like that, but okay, maybe I'm the fifth element. But, so I don't think we separate, but I understand what you're asking around. No, I think that hip-hop has always borne the brunt of being to this and to that. Hip-hop is extra homophobic. Really, so is America. And so is the Supreme Court. And so is freaking Hillary Clinton until last year, which is I hate gay votes. You know what I'm saying? It's real. Yeah, I'm going to bash on her any opportunity I get. I don't care. I'm bashing on the Democrats.
Do what you want.
I'd rather be dealing with Donald Trump. Thank you for telling me your racism, as opposed to the Democrat Party for hiding your racism. But I think that, so it's not separated in that way. Now, I do think that in hip-hop discourse, I'm personally beyond the conversation about women and sexism. First, because we have hip-hop feminism that was given to us by Joan Morgan. And if we look at just the last 5 years in hip-hop culture, on every element except the musical element, which is now more catching up, we've been discoursing this for 20 years. Sexism in the movement, in hip-hop, homophobia in hip-hop. And then hip-hop becomes the space where we smash on all that. So whether it's Joan Morgan intervening with hip-hop feminism, whether it's a 15-year now history of hip-hop feminism in action within hip-hop, us challenging particularly men who are sexist, but also women who behave in patriarchal ways, right? Whether it's challenging power, whether it's challenging the president. Hip-hop has always been doing this, and whether it's been not accepting of LGBTQ people as more as LGBTQ people saying, we're part of this generation, we are Black, we are this, we are not going to be silent in this anymore. And in actuality, if you as a heterosexual don't check your normative experience, we're going to date you. In terms of activism and spaces where you can be at. So I always find hip-hop willing to take the challenge of being in the room and fighting that fight. And I think that has extended somewhat to BLM, but I also understand a younger generation does not view hip-hop the way I view it. And I know why. And because hip-hop has been so depoliticized in the mainstream the last decade, that then young people, when they begin to understand politics, they're still not deconstructing the effects of the mainstream media. So I asked a lot of my younger folks that I was teaching at Cal State, why are you in this hip-hop class? And all of them wanted to talk about lyrics. And And I was like, well, this is not a music appreciation class. We're not going to be decoding Jay-Z. I don't really care to talk. And in fact, we're not going to talk about Jay-Z or Kanye West or all these people that you think represent hip-hop. And they have been part of a creation, an artistic element in hip-hop. But as far as their relationship to the larger hip-hop community, they don't exist except for people to say, yo, the Black Album was a shit. Like, Kanye's a good producer. Like, this artist is amazing. But in terms of politics and how the community sees some of these artists, they can kind of separate that. Doesn't mean like, you know, I won't rock to a Jay-Z album. It just means I understand that Jay-Z is not going to save the hip-hop community. It doesn't represent what we, as working class people in hip-hop, are always fighting for. So, yeah, I think it's something that in a little way has been discoursed to the point where I see particularly younger people wanting to have a very different discussion about hip-hop and politics in general.
Word. Nah, that was deep. Yeah, I definitely have some different opinions, I think, there. Like, I definitely think it's important to talk about Jay-Z, Kanye, like, Future, Drake, like, let's talk about it all. Because the young people, you're dealing with it anyway, so we might as well take spaces and talk about it and make sure you understand it in the right way. Also, that is part of our culture, too. Like, I'm not denying that they're hip-hop, too. That's part of who we are too, you know what I'm saying? I can't deny that. So for me, as an artist, like even me as an artist, as a conscious artist, I still listen to all types of hip hop, all types of music, the ratchet stuff, the conscious stuff, the uplifting stuff, the gangster shit, you know what I'm saying? Like all of that is within me, you know what I'm saying? And so I feel like we have to embrace it all, have those discussions that are difficult. And I think sometimes young people get like this kind of goes back to what you were saying about meeting people where they are, you know what I'm saying? So if that's where you are, where your consciousness is at like a line that Lil Wayne might have said, you know what I'm saying? And like let's start there and let's go from there, you know what I'm saying? So, but I did wanna highlight a line that Kanye said in that song New Slaves. He said, like the new world order. Meanwhile, the DEA teamed up with the CCA. They trying to lock niggas up. They trying to make new slaves. See, that's that privately owned prison. Get your piece today. They probably all in the Hamptons bragging about what they made. Fuck your Hampton house. I'll fuck your Hampton spouse. Came in their Hampton blouse and in their Hampton mouth. Anyway, that's gay for you. That's gay for you, you know. But
that's not challenging, right? Like Kanye, what is he saying? Everything that many artists have been saying around mass incarceration.
Yeah, but the problem is, the artists that are saying it reach 20 people. And he just reached 20 million I had young boys Googling, yo, what's CCA? What's they don't know what that is. Like, so they're learning.
Do something as an artist around that. You can't say that Immortal Technique or Dead Prez or Rebel Diaz or Talib. I mean, you're on an album with Talib, right? I would say I don't think Kanye and Jay-Z are gonna maybe holler at you, even though they should. I think they're so separated from the community because of their work, of their class position. And so to me, what I'm saying is, look, artists are gonna be artists, right? An artist has a right to do whatever you want. I'm not that person, you probably, I'm not that person to ever go on a panel and even want to have a discussion about the artist, because I think that's the hyper-visibility in hip-hop. And then if we do discuss the artist, sometimes we are not still exposing, or we're not reaching young people at where they might be at. They might have feel Jay-Z, Kanye, Lil Wayne, Drake, and all that. But they also then need to be exposed and understand a Tef Poe from Ferguson, right? Or a Nene Ali, or local artists, or those kind of artists. And we, I think as practitioners, probably put that in our classroom, like, yo, I'm hollering about this, but really feel me on that in a way. And I still think the conversation just always focuses on these hyper superstars that really, they not only have a connection to the community, there's really no accountability mechanism for them to have that connection.
Yeah.
But that's okay. I'm not looking for, like as Matu said a long time ago, I'm not looking for rappers to be my leaders. You know, and
but they already are, so you don't have to look. They already are the leaders. It doesn't matter if you look to them or not.
Yeah.
They're the leaders.
I guess my question would be, what is that Jay-Z line? What is that? So Jay-Z said.
And I'm just talking about leaders in terms of thought, the way young people are thinking. And we talked about repetition. I tagged my name on the wall backstage, and I put it twice. And I was like, you know, we like repetition, but like seriously though, repetition, like. The leaders of thought are the music rappers. Like we listen to that shit all day, all the time. So how is that not like? Who's guiding your thought? Like, are young people reading books over and over again? Are they reciting the lyrics of Paul Robeson over? No, they're listening to, like, that's what's leading them. That's what's guiding their thoughts, their decisions, even when they don't even know it. You know what I mean? And so I think we have to acknowledge it. At the same time, you're right. Like, that's a dangerous situation to be in. You know, that's why I think like. We have to expose people, like, obviously in I teach a hip-hop class at Morgan State, and I expose, you know, I brought Talib Kweli last semester to my class, you know what I'm saying? Like, because, you know, I teach in Baltimore, so everything was jumping off from Baltimore. We were there, came, you know, we built. Like, that's important, but at the same time, like, I see a disconnect. Talk about disconnect. I see a disconnect between sometimes, like, what's happening, like, in some of these discussions, and then like this was happening, like what do young people listen to in the streets, what they know about in the streets, you know, and so I try to like, I'm real interested, we talked about what we're interested in, I'm interested in like bridging that gap. What I like about the new hip hop, I'll tell you what I like about the new hip hop, the new wave of hip hop artists, right? So back in the day, it was like you were either conscious or not. You know what I'm saying? Like you had a big, like they checked you at the door. Like you got a backpack dog, like you don't have that shit. You can't come in. Like it was really clear cut. Now what I think is important is young people are a little bit more nuanced. So you got cats like Kendrick and Cole and Ab Soul and the whole TDE for real. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of other people too, a lot of other cliques that, you know, you can't say is conscious, but you can't say is that either, right? It's more nuanced. It's more of a gray area. It's more of, you know, this is who I am. I'm not perfect. I'm not trying to portray this kind of perfect image, because I think it's where some of the conscious MCs fell into a trap where they had to kind of be this image that really is pretty hard to keep. You know what I'm saying? It's inconsistent with being a human being. So I feel like the new artists, what I like about it is they're open, they're more transparent about their demons, about their struggles, about all of those things, and they inject themselves into it. They inject themselves into the narrative. I think that's really important, rather than just speaking about the people and those people and these people and y'all people and niggas over there and niggas, but actually injecting themselves into the stories and the struggles and the triumphs. So that's what I love about hip hop in general, but that's what I love about hip hop right now. I feel like it's more nuanced right now, like, and that's important because if you really want to reach people, you gotta hit them with they gotta like it first. They gotta nod their head first before they.
The significance of what you're saying about the new hip hop, which I don't know, by the way, and young people connecting their feelings and their reality to the music is significant. For me as an educator, it's significant because you do not become active or activated until you have a connection. Right? You have to have a connection. And so it's incumbent on those of us who are in connection with young people to listen, to hear, and to guide that connection. You know. So, and of course, the guidance that we're primarily looking for is to become sufficiently politically active. So you begin to create, you begin to do some of the things that you're talking about, Rosa. You know, around action. Doing that which is creating a liberated space, a space that is just, the space that validates our humanity.
And I will say this too, and I know this is kind of, we could probably talk a lot about this, but I will say, like, for me as a young black man, growing up and seeing other young black men and black women take their art and their craft and be successful at it, and reach a lot of people at it, and do something positive, that was inspiring for me. So not only did certain rappers when I was coming up, not even just the conscious rappers, but it could just be, you know, just regular rap, not only did they educate me about things that were going on in the world, you know, hit me to things that I would later on discover and research or whatever, but they also inspired me, you know what I mean? They inspired me to be serious about my craft. They inspired me the work ethic within hip-hop. Again, professors don't hustle like hip-hop artists hustle. No, not even close. Not even close. So the hustle inspires me, you know what I'm saying? And like that, so I just think that there's so much that we can get out of it, not just, you know, so even people like the superstars or whoever, you know, yes, we can criticize them and they deserve that too, but there's definitely like, even like for me, they inspired me, you know what I mean? I can sit here to you today and say Jay-Z has inspired me in my life.
Well, what I'm saying is that I don't really care about always having the discussion on hip-hop about the rappers.
Yeah.
I don't care about the recorded artists who perform in the studio all the time. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree with you.
We as scholars and activists have to uplift the reason this even exists for Jay-Z or Kanye to even be created, right? I'm talking about the culture of hip-hop. I'm talking about when you walk into an event, why the DJ is an important element that sets the tone. I'm talking about graffiti artists like a Lady Pink or Two Fly that are thought leaders as well. I'm talking about the scholars, the activists, the journalists, the feminists. That's what I'm talking about. And that's why I say that you seeing that whole conscious stuff, we know that was created by the labels. Listen, I managed Dead Prez. I was in Sony offices when they literally told them, can you please put some more niggas and bitches up in here or we cannot release the album. I was there when Nas wanted to work with them. I was in the elevator when Russell Simmons was like, y'all are amazing, but I will never sign you. Wow. The industry is something that I think we get caught up about. That's why I think you're exactly right about, let's say, a Joey Badass right now, a Kendrick, a Tef Poe, maybe people haven't heard, but you will hear about him, a Rebel Diaz, Immortal, and even Dead Prez. 20 years they've been around. There's a reason they've been around for 20 years. There's a reason Talib does 300 shows a year, where many mainstream artists can't even do 100 venues filled up. That's what, and I think we're not even debating as much as like, you're right about them being thought leaders, but what I'm seeing now is young people are creating or trying to find ways of leadership that may not be so dependent on those thought leaders.
Yeah,
I think that's where we might
and I think a difference that we have too, Rosa, is probably the capitalism piece, because I'm seeing the young people like, get your business together, get your money. You know what I'm saying? And I was inspired by the hip people in hip hop that I saw get their business together, get their money together, take care of their families, take care of their business, own land, I own land, I own property, I'm into it. I think we should, I'm into that. So that wealth building has been inspiring to me within hip hop too. And I think it's hard that's one of the things that sometimes the activist community, the radical community is so anti-capitalist, but when you're talking to a bunch of poor kids, that's like who it just doesn't connect. You know what I'm saying? Like you're like.
I apologize.
Next on capitalism 101.
I would like to continue classes. This has been like a master class. The issue is
I've learned a lot from these two right here today. I feel like I should have been taking notes, but I gotta look at the videos.
No, like I said, I want to do a Q&A, but in order to do that, I gotta get this one last question on. It was. Hip-hop provided an expression. Hip-hop provided an outlet for expression not just for people of color, but also for our white brothers and sisters. Karis states that hip-hop offers a sense of rebellion, freedom, manhood, and courage. With that being said, what's the role of the white rapper within the Black Lives Matter movement, if any? Artists such as Eminem have been open and somewhat accountable for their privilege within the space. Is there more they should be doing? And a follow-up question would be, what is the white person's space, the white ally's space in Black Lives Matter?
Look, I feel like within hip hop, I don't care. I don't care about any white rappers. I don't care about Eminem, Bogle-Assegai. I don't care. I'm sorry. And a good friend of mine, Chris Crass, amazing white anti-imperialist, just wrote an amazing piece about we don't need allies. White folks better figure out what side they're on. And just because you're an ally right now to BLM doesn't mean you won't maybe be politically an enemy next year.
That's right.
You know, and within BLM, I have to say it's been interesting for me to be in rooms with white folks that get it, because I grew up in that multiracial hip hop space where you had like white folks with the well-meaning and like, you can't have the mic, or like, shut up. Like, we don't want to know about your like experience in suburbia right now. Like, and you know what? I grew up in suburbia, and you had a totally different experience than me, right? Because of skin color. I feel we need white folks that have a political ideology that's called anti-imperialism. You want to be white and be radical? Follow Laura Whitehorn, Marilyn Buck, David Gilbert, the Weather Underground, the White Patriots, right? With that said, I think this is where hip hop is incredibly important to probably 2 generations now of white young folks, mostly those that are exposed in working class neighborhoods or are in college environments, right? That they've been able to name their privilege, they've been able to discourse around it, and they've been able to understand that their actual history of resistance, whether it be abolitionists all the way down to the people I just mentioned from the Weather Underground, of a concerted group of white social justice movement people that have always put their bodies on the line for black and brown liberation. I think white young folks need to hear that story of white resistance as well. But that story is always with what? Within the context of black people leading it. And this is where you're beginning to see the cracks in BLM, right? Right? When we're marching and we're saying what we need to say, and you got white folks beginning to negotiate language and discourse and behavior, what's respectable, what's not. I feel you didn't pay attention to me. I feel you didn't do this. And I think the way, our role is, and I think BLM being such a call for black people, and Patrice openly should say this, Black Lives Matter was a call for our humanity. It was not a call to white people, right? It wasn't like black white people notice us. I think everything I said, if you're white and you weren't offended, then you're down. Right? If you're offended by anything you say, you might have to check back your version of what Black Lives Matter means. You know, and I say that with a lot of white folks in my family that don't want me at Thanksgiving. Little bit of pledges, they don't want me around.
You know, from, again, this is the 60s, right? Liberal white people, yes, were down. They were down, they were into the marches, they were into the conversations, they were into the being anti-racist and so on and so forth. But what happened to us is that our white liberal friends who supported our movements cleaned up, put on suits, and became the people who oppressed us. Right? Put up the ladder. And we were confused, right? Because we thought that they were genuine. Right? So our white friends and colleagues who were part of the movement essentially moved out and took on the benefits of the society, the system. All right? And as you quite rightly pointed out, you know, this idea of we want to regulate. Yes? What is the language? What is the behavior? What is appropriate? What is inappropriate? We have to be real clear and not make the same kinds of mistakes around who speaks for us. I think the Black Lives Matter movement does not suggest that there's a need to have a white leadership. You know, there is a role for, as you quite rightly pointed out, you know, people of European ancestry in the United States and throughout the world to begin to look at their morality and to begin to look at this question I posed at the beginning, which is, do all lives matter? And Are all human beings of equal moral worth? Why is it not possible for you to engage in struggle with those in your own group who are anti-imperialist, right? And who want to see a better world for all people, not just some people? Why? Because we're talking about power relationships here. And we have to be clear that we want to be in the driving seat. This is no longer a case of I cannot speak, or I am afraid to speak, or I do not understand the language that I need to use. All right? So our white brothers and sisters, if you will be respectable if they would understand and hear what we're saying to them, which is feel free to go out and struggle. And make sure your struggle is compatible, but you need to be doing the anti-imperialist thing.
Right? And that's why you see the cracks in it, right? Like when people start shutting down Bernie Sanders. And you're like, yes, white liberals, please bring it. Please let us know that Bernie Sanders is the best thing. Even though he's down for drones, voted to get Asante extradited, voted with Bill Clinton on every freaking bill. Like, and I think that's what made Black Lives Matter, for a lot of white folks that were allies at that time, flee.
Yes.
And this is why I encourage you to read Chris Krass.
Yes.
Or, I like Tim Wise. He's got some but still Tim, at least is listening. And it's just very interesting, right, that when we assert self-determination, and that when we're talking about Black Lives Matter as well, right, like this idea of allies is something that is interesting, because then it can also be narrowed to like excluding those of us who are Black Latinos, identify as Black as well. I think the bigger picture with BLM as a call is also, right, we're talking about Black people all over the world. You Black in Palestine, you Black in Brazil, in Panama, in DR.
Absolutely.
When people, the more than the majority of the Dominican Republic is against the government, but all we hear is the narrative that Dominicans are anti-Black, that hate Haitians. When you're like, do you understand even the history of the Dominican Republic for people not to even call themselves Black? And then you see Afro-Dominicans and other Dominicans holding up Black Lives Matter sign here in DR in support of Haitian brothers and sisters. That's the kind of stuff we have to have seep into the consciousness as well.
Have people see that, right?
Yeah, I'm definitely, feeling the energy of those points. For me, it's important. When me and Qualia actually were in Baltimore, we were having some conversations with some organizers, and it was important for me to let them know, from my perspective, as an artist, that I never call myself an activist or an organizer, and it's just really important for me. The reason why is because that kind of work is so intense and it's so important, and I've never done that kind of work. You know what I mean? I'm an artist, so, and sometimes, I talk about, you use a word in my book called artivism, where an artist kind of takes ideas, that are going to be influential and helpful to the movement and provide that soundtrack or that energy or that spark. But definitely for me, I'm an artist first, so my thinking is always, how do I create the spark through the words, through the films, through the visuals, and through all of these things, And in doing that, I'm trying to work with anybody who's about liberation, about freedom, about emancipatory, work. So that's kind of how I view it. You know what I mean? To kind of take each individual, because as you say, I've seen like as you were talking about earlier, Rosa, just in terms of like people who look like us that, you know what I mean? That's about it. And then people that don't look like us that have. So for me, I just kind of try to deal with people as individuals, as they are, because you never really know. I've seen a lot of folks that look like me who weren't down, and then vice versa. So
that's very true. Not to cut you. But
one other thing I wanted to say real quick, because it's kind of related to the birthlessness. Because to me, it's kind of like the continuum. Yeah, the continuum. But what I was going to say is, you're talking about are all human beings, equal? Yeah. So where I'm at with that, Professor Bogle, you know where I'm at with it, honestly? I'm at a place where it's like, forget about humans, we gotta start thinking about all life. Like, I feel like the moment we mess up is the moment, you even say human life is more important than the life of like a fly. Because if you could do that, then you can, then that's all you need. That's the premise and the foundation for basically creating a scale and judging life and basing it with. So you can kill this, but you can't kill this because what? Because it has a bigger brain or has a, you know what I mean? And then you could, so for me, it's about, and again, related to my son and just the spiritual journey I've been on, it's about like life, like all living things. Recognize that everything is living. So absolute respect for everything that's alive.
That's the African principle.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Recognize that all life or everything lives.
Yes.
And it's important for us to do that. But we're caught in a moment where this is urgent for us because we're being shot down.
Oh yeah.
Right? And it's a situation that we have to deal with. How do we deal with the reality of the fact that we're people who are being contained and controlled in a society that says that we are of no value? We are of no value. There's an urgency to that, right? We have a need to organize around that and to become active around that. Because people will do to you what you allow them to do to you. Right? Absolutely will do that. And every single one of us, I'll say it again, we have a responsibility to act and become active in whatever way is comfortable and works for you. Right? Everybody does not have to do the same thing or at the same time or be as vocal. Some people can be very, very silent and be engaged in the liberation struggle.
Yeah.
Right?
Can I, because what MK said was so, real, like, I know Talib, so like that's my homie, right? And me and him always have these debates.
Talking about the artist thing?
Yeah, especially when the Rick Ross thing came down, people should watch that debate, me and Talib. And people are like, oh my God, he hates you. I'm like, we're going out to dinner, like in a Ross. We had an hour to debate Rick Ross's debauchery and rape culture stuff, and but I've always respected Talib in all the years we did Black August, up until now, right, of course, Ferguson and all that, because he one day was like, Rosa, you gotta stop calling yourself just an activist, you're an organizer. Like, I'm an activist and an artist, or artist activist, but he's like, it's intense to be an organizer. And Patrice, in one of her recent interviews, really broke this down around organizing and activism. Like, I think a lot of people became activists on August 9th. And I think that's critically important that happened, but that the organizing is a skill, right? You have to learn it. You have to be taught it. You have to craft it. You're going to make mistakes around it. Maybe I had to take the year off to re-engage in on-the-ground organizing, but in that year I couldn't write a dissertation. I couldn't go to an academic conference. You have to make the choices as an organizer, and I think that's really important for us to keep uplifting the organizers in the work, and when we sometimes play the back role. But as scholars, academics, I think we're in the tradition of scholar activism as well. And I think that is important to uplift, to not always separate those of us who are in these institutions who have a clear understanding of how we fit and don't fit in and what the role is. I think that's important for young folks to know that at this point, it's really about being multifaceted in your work, but being able to sustain in your work. Like, that's something I didn't learn as an organizer, that I don't want young people to fall into and then be burnt out at 35. When you might be doing this till you're 100, like when we assess till the day you die, right?
All right. I have a stack of questions I can't get to. Because honestly, you guys can hear me whenever. That's what it is. Like, I'm in these streets. No.
And everybody everybody get that Indy 500. Yeah. Let's plug in like one to Indy 500.
Alright, thanks for being here. Can you outside a little bit, we'll show a little bit. DJ Blue comes outside to like some music. So thank you to Mark Playhouse. Thank you to John Point Guy. Thank you to California. Without whom none of this happens. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your experience.
Thank you, Patrick.
Shout out to everybody with a story, with a dream. Shout out to everybody who ever shout out to all the underdogs, all the ones who they doubt, overlook, misinterpret, misunderstand.